Hey there, Knuckles! Glad you finally made it!
I guess there are no emeralds here.
Oh, hey guys, how's it going?
What's the smell? It smells like trash!
Well, as you know, this is the last summer before we all grow up and go to high school, so I hit up Blockbuster and got us some rentals for the weekend. We're going to be watching Blair Witch, eating Ben & Jerry's, and most importantly, playing, Skies of Arcadia?
Let's try this!
Serves 'em right!
Moons, give me strength!
Damn, we ain't putting that one away in a night. The concept of a weekend rental will be familiar to game enjoyers of a certain age. Maybe you remember going to your local video rental place with your friends or your parents and grabbing a game or two to round out the week. I played a lot of games this way, and in particular I really loved it if I could beat a game in that short space of time. Now, gaming culture has changed a lot since then, and these days we got gamers who will piss their pants if they don't get 600 hours of big budget cinematic gameplay set in a 2-scale version of Planet Earth. But I actually don't like that so much. The shift to those bigger and longer games, it doesn't really do it for me. I will generally have at least one big game on the go at any given time because Mrs. Enjoyer is a fan of longer RPG type beats, and so we like getting our couch co-op on and playing those together. Doing all the side quests, grinding for that good gear, hunting down every collectible. That's how we roll, and it's a grand old time. I love Mrs. Enjoyer. But when it comes to just me sitting down and having a solo game, I prefer a shorter experience. And it's probably worth saying that I generally consider a game to be short if it's less than maybe 8 to 10 hours. Something you could conceivably beat in a weekend. Once we get into that 20-hour mark, I consider that to be a long game. Just so you have an idea of where my head's at on this, because I know everyone's going to have different views on this stuff. What I'm going to do in this video is explore the allure of shorter games and why I love them so much. Cue that Sonic meme that does the rounds sometimes. I've always been a big fan of short form media. I like it when a thing can get a lot done in a short space of time. It feels punchy and potent. But I think these days a lot of people get hung up on the idea of value for money. A new AAA game is likely pitched at a pretty spicy price, so people want to know that they're getting their money's worth. And I just want to put it out on Front Street here that I dislike the term AAA because I don't understand how it came to be and I think it sounds silly. But it's useful to say because people just know what you mean when you say that. Nonetheless, I personally don't buy a lot of these types of games just because they don't usually appeal to my tastes. That doesn't mean that I can't understand the cash value argument though. I get it. If I went to a fancy restaurant and paid a lot of money and then the meal was very small, I would feel ripped off too. Sure, I get that. However, I cannot eat that meal again unless I buy it again. But once you own a game, that's yours forever, champ. You go nuts and play that shit as many times as you like, as often as you like. Which is to say that replay value means a lot more to me than game length. There are games that I've beaten an inordinate amount of times and that I know I will jump back into again and again, maybe to do a full playthrough or maybe just to replay my favourite missions if the game has a level select option. Or even a level select cheat because it's 2023 and I'm 35. I can cheat in a damn game if I want to. Point being that I don't know how much my parents paid for Blue Stinger, Sonic Adventure or Toy Commander when they came out, but they were all top shelf games and so I have to assume they were expensive for the 90s. But I'll be damned if we didn't get our money's worth because I still replay all of those regularly. And the flip side of this argument, I suppose, is that I am currently playing through Skies of Arcadia, which is comfortably a 50-hour plus game, and yet I am enjoying it greatly. Some games certainly can justify their sheer size and scale without feeling forced and drawn out, but I'd say that they are the exception rather than the rule. My love of short games probably stems from the fact that as a young kid I really just played platformers, fighting games and arcade beat-em-ups, all generally pretty short experiences. Golden Axe is not necessarily spinning me a wonderfully rich tale, but it does get a lot across with its art style and small character moments. This scene here where the villagers run screaming lets me know that this is a peaceful town being raided by baddies and my job is to stop the baddies. The little nighttime camping scenes where these gnomes steal your potions add a little bit of comedy and mischief. And Golden Axe of course was made for arcades, so it's like 20 or 30 minutes to beat the whole thing. But you get to see some awesome locations and fight a ton of cool enemies during that time. Also, they did this weird quasi 3D remake of it for the PS2, which I only bring up because it's weird and I don't know where else I'd mention it, but it's kind of interesting. Likewise, the Dreamcast's library boasts a good number of arcadey type jams like House of the Dead 2, Zombie Revenge, Power Stone 1 and 2, Soul Calibur and so on, so no doubt my love of this console has strengthened my love for smaller games. Dynamite Cop has a boneheaded action movie plot that's dumber than most Seagal joints, but who cares? I am absolutely here for the bombastic action, those outrageous moments where you end up fighting an octopus in the lower deck, or when you land on the island and find the chicken-like creature from Golden Axe. Really has big B-movie appeal for me. And on top of that brawling is top-notch, and it's a great way to kill an hour or so. Meanwhile, Sword of the Berserk is actually very serious and genuinely moving, but at a svelte 4 hours of gameplay you can easily put it away in an afternoon. And whilst I could just go on enumerating all the Dreamcast beat-em-ups that I love, I can't move on to the next section without mentioning a brand new Dreamcast game that I've really been vibing with. This here is Driving Strikers, and it is a bona fide Dreamcast game with actual online functionality in 2023. Pretty nuts, right? It's also got crossplay, so even if you get the Steam version, you can still hook up with Dreamcast players and have online games. That's some clever tech wizardry right there, I'm impressed. As you can see, it's got those beautiful low poly models and all the Dreamcast aesthetic stuff I would expect to see. Big bright city plazas, balmy summer beaches, smooth round cars all over the place. Fast adventure. And it's a sports game too, not usually my go-to genre, but I am vibing with it mightily. You might see the cars and the football and assume that this has some Rocket League influence, but not that I can tell. It honestly feels like it should have been a multiplayer mode on Toy Commander. The cars handle in a snappy little remote control fashion, a bit like the old Mega Drive Micro Machines game, and I just really love it. Full review coming at some point soon, I am sure, but for now, hit me up if you're online and want to jump in for a game. One more before we move on, and this one is a little bit more modern. It's Way of the Samurai 4. Now the whole Way of the Sam series is incredible, and I love all of them. If you've never played them, they're basically micro RPGs, or more accurately, hack and slash games with RPG elements. Oh, and they're janky as fuck too. The stories tend to take place over a few in-game days, so each run will generally take you no more than 2 or 3 hours. However, the sheer amount of depth that they pack in is pretty astonishing, and a short but deep game is super appealing to me, in the same way that a long and shallow game is my sworn enemy. In this particular entry, you always have agency, even during plot-critical cutscenes. The Chief Minister parades into town and gives a formal speech. You can whip out your sword and call him a dickhead. You find yourself on a serious samurai mission to investigate a bandit hideout. You can say you're scared or hungry and run away. I don't normally care very much about dialogue choices and branching paths in games, but the scope here is pretty staggering. You can be a stoic Kurosawa protagonist, or you can be basically Goro Majima, and the game is equally viable either way. It's a great example of a dev working within their budget and limitations to develop a short but infinitely replayable experience. But even if a game ain't short, it can still be rental friendly in other ways. Oh boy, that's the stuff. I've said this before on the channel, but I'm always genuinely delighted when games have a mission select menu, which I guess follows on from my thoughts about replay value, because I love being able to dive back in and replay a specific mission that I like without having to restart the whole game. Case in point, I love Pumpkin Hill and I love Mad Space, but I don't particularly want to replay all of Sonic Adventure 2 to get there. Please no hate mail, I just prefer Sonic Adventure 1. But those stages absolutely slap, and Sega did me a real kindness with this world map here, letting me replay my favourite stages whenever I want without ever having to worry about Shadow the Hedgehog. Now let's say I have a free hour before I go out somewhere. That's not really enough time for me to sit down and get fully immersed in a game, but I can certainly blast through a few stages on Gauntlet Legends with my boy, Yellow Knight. Or I can go on a little adventure through Egypt with Miss Pac-Man, battling ghosts and avoiding traps and springing around all over the show. Or I can go Jet Graffiti mode for a quick 15-minute blast around Kogane Cho. And yeah, I can use a tank to boil an egg whenever I want. Sticking with that small toy theme then, Sarge's Heroes is a franchise I have some nostalgia for. Well, the first two are anyway. I never played the third one and I believe it was some sort of gritty reboot. But here's the thing, what interests me about Sarge's Heroes is exactly the same thing that interests me in Toy Commander and Toy Story, the idea of being a little guy in a big world. That novelty of being in everyday spaces like a garden or a kitchen, but now you're tiny and so you interact with all this stuff in different ways than you normally would. Problem is, Sarge's Heroes has this weird storyline where there are 2 dimensions, and one of them is the Army Men world. So when you're there, everything is just normal sized and it looks regular, it's just that it's populated by green plastic folk. Not very interesting to me. So Sarge's Heroes is kind of half of a good game. But those levels where you're in a bath or the kitchen or the living room are pretty sweet, so I definitely want to revisit those, which I can because of the password system. Hooray! I guess what I'm saying is that I truly appreciate it when a game gives you these ways to maximise your enjoyment, and now that I'm older with less free time, I appreciate it even more. Because even some of the all-time greats have levels that I'm glad to see the back of. I never ever want to protect Natalia in the control room ever again, but I'm always down for dueling with Trevelyan on the cradle. And so thank you to all the games with mission select menus for enriching our lives, but we are not done here just yet. Here's some deep wisdom for you. You don't have to finish a game to enjoy it. That sounds obvious perhaps, but in today's culture of speedruns and collectathon completionism, it's perhaps not as obvious as it once was. When I was a kid, I rented Parasite Eve 2, and I didn't beat it in the weekend. But if anyone ever asks me, I would always say that Parasite 2 is a game that I really enjoy, because it is, I like the story and the systems. Maybe one day I will go back and beat it, maybe not. It doesn't matter is the point. I had fun and played it enough to get the gist. There are so many games out there these days, far more than when I was a lad, that thinking about them all can put us into a bit of decision paralysis. It's the same feeling I got 25 years ago walking into a Blockbuster with my mum and dad and looking at 50 games knowing that I could only rent 1 or 2, but now we get that feeling on a much bigger scale. I subscribe to PSN and the amount of games on there is insane, and I know I will never be able to play them all. Some I just don't want to of course, but there are plenty of good games available too. And likewise, when I look at the catalogue of Dreamcast games that are out there, I will never own them all, and even if I did, I would certainly never have the time to play them all. So how the heck do we tangle with something like that? How do we decide which games in the infinite vastness of space are worth our precious time? Well, this is where that weekend rental mindset comes in handy. Let's say that I have 20 hours of free time in a week to get some gaming done. Do I want to use that playing half of a JRPG, or do I want to blast through 4 or 5 smaller games, all of which have a shot at becoming beloved? That is of course personal preference, and it's totally up to you how you prefer to use your time, but I tend to go with the small games, and that's probably because of that penchant I have for replaying games. I like to have a good pool of shorties to draw from. I talk a lot on this channel about comfy and cozy things too. I generally see games as a hobby to relax with, rather than anything competitive or challenging. And I'm one of those people who will rewatch their favourite shows and movies time and time again because it's comforting and reassuring. That familiarity, that knowledge of what will happen, but also the excitement of looking forward to the really good bits, I kinda treat games the same way. Before we wrap up, let's just circle back to that cash value argument for a second. See, if you are very concerned with what your cash is getting you in a game, then I think it's worth considering the quality and not just the quantity. The cheaper games tend to be the little indie joints, which as noted are usually shorter, but also often better. There are a ton of bad ones of course, so please don't think I just ride hard for any indie game, but because of the more auteur nature of these games, devs usually have a greater degree of creative control, and they don't have to make decisions by committee. As such, the very best indie games are always chock full of imagination and original ideas that I wouldn't necessarily get to see anywhere else. I have nothing against God of War as a franchise. I even own the newest one because it came bundled in with the PS5, but I haven't played it yet and I have no burning desire to do so. Not only does How Long to Beat inform me that the main story is 26 hours long, but I also know what I'm getting. Angry bald guy, very violent, Norse mythology. Nothing inherently bad about any of that, but I've just seen it all before. Whereas if you look at something like Solar Ash for instance, I ain't never in my entire goddamn life seen a game quite like that. And Solar Ash wears its influences on its sleeve too, even some influence from AAA franchises, but the way it weaves it all together is so unique. And guess what? It's 5 hours long, perfect weekend rental length, and absolutely deserving of multiple replays too. We'll draw it to a close here, folks. Just a little video to shout out some of the things I think are great about short games, and also highlight how that rental culture was a formative experience for me and probably others of my generation. I do hope that you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please hit those buttons for me, and I shall see you in the next one.